Hilchos, Tumas, Tzaraas, Perek Shisha Asar, the laws of impurity imparted by Tzaraas, chapter 16. It's good to be back. It's good to be back home. It's good to be back with you. It's good to be back with our equipment. I'm not going to say that today's pictures are all that entertaining. Didn't have so much time to prepare on my first day back, but it's good. We're here and we're going forward. And what a day to restart. The day that completes this set of laws that we've been on for more than 2 weeks now, the laws of Tzaraas. It's a chapter that continues really yesterday's and the day before's topic about Tzaraas Batim, the Tzaraas as it affects homes. But then at the end, Rambam always gives us a treat at the end of a set of laws where he reflects on the content of the set of laws from an ethical point of view. And Tzaraas is no different. A wonderful final halacha with some nice explanations of the Rebbe that we'll pepper in. Anyway, this is a great day to start. So let's get right into it. We've talked about, in the last 2 chapters, the types of homes that are eligible, qualifying for Tzaraas to affect them, and also the process by which you determine whether a home has Tzaraas. And it's unique, different than other types of Tzaraas of the skin and of clothing, where you have a maximum of 3 weeks, not 2, to determine what happens. Now, in today's chapter, we have to talk about the Tumas, which really is the whole goal, as I've said before in this set of laws, and in other sets of laws, the whole goal of describing all the things that get you to a point of something becoming impure is to know that. What is the type of impurity that it imparts? Right, with the corpse, 25 chapters for a set of laws, but we're talking about the bulk of it was defining what constitutes a case of a corpse or a case of a corpse transmitting impurity, and now, what is that impurity? Same with Para Aduma. It's a whole bunch of chapters to know how to prepare the Para Aduma, but once you get down to it, what we want to know is what's the impurity that the water of the Para Aduma imparts. Same with Tzaraas. It takes a whole bunch of chapters to define how something becomes a qualifying lesion, but now that it's a qualifying lesion, it imparts impurity on the skin, on clothing, and also on the home. So what is the law of a home that becomes afflicted with Tzaraas in terms of impurity? It says that Rambam halacha aleph bayis hamenuga. When a home gets afflicted with Tzaraas, av me'avois hatumais, it becomes itself a primary source of impurity. Kol hanegei boy nitma. Anybody that touches it becomes impure. Now we saw yesterday that there's different stages of a home's impurity. There's what's called bayis musgar, a home that's in quarantine because the lesions are still waiting to figure it out. Then we have bayis muchlat, a home that's been decidedly impure, and sometimes you even can have a home that has to be destroyed completely. That's even worse. And certainly the Rambam is talking about the last 2, muchlat, and once it's destroyed, that's all you have, it's just the destroyed stones. But there's an argument amongst the Achreinim if we're talking about also musgar. Does even a home in the state of quarantine have the tumah that the Rambam is talking about? Some are of the opinion that yes, others say that not. But either way, whichever home communicates impurity, it communicates impurity in the way that if you touch it, you become impure. So too, the stones that you remove from it after certain stages of quarantine, as we saw yesterday, if the lesion spreads after a week, you have to remove the stones, remove the dirt, and coat it with a new coat of clay. Same thing if it spreads after a second week, or after a second week it doesn't change at all. Same thing, chelitz v'kaitze v'tach. You have to remove the stones, remove the dirt, and also put a fresh coat of clay on the house. So those stones that are removed, the Rambam only mentions the stones, but the commentaries understand that it's also referring to the dirt. Oy avanim ve'etzim ve'afar shel bayis k'shenoisitzin oisai, or the wood, stones, and dirt of a home that has to be destroyed. That's the worst, most tragic result of Tzaraas of a home. Kulan avois tumais. All of these materials that were afflicted with Tzaraas themselves become a primary source of impurity. B'chol kezayis mehem, and in a volume of an olive-sized portion from them, mitame adam v'kelim b'maga, will make people and utensils impure by touching, and additionally uvemasa uvevia, carrying them and entering them. And we'll soon see how that's defined. Ketzad, what does this mean? Im nichnas kazayis me'al nebayis tar. If a kazayis, an olive-sized volume portion from a destroyed Tzaraas home, enters a pure home, nitma kelasher babayis me'adam v'kelim, it impurifies everything in the home, people and utensils. Shekulan mitamin b'biyah ka'adam mitzayra, because all of these entities that come from a home with Tzaraas transmit the impurity of entering, if they enter a home, just like a person does, as we've seen when it came to the Tzaraas of the skin. But kulan asurin bahana, they're also all forbidden to have benefit from them. Even if you burnt them and you made lime out of the stones, it's still forbidden to have benefit from them. Because the pasuk, when it describes the tzaraas of the home, it says tzaraas mam eres. It is a tzaraas which is mam eres. Mam eres means cursed. Tein by me'era va'al tehana by. Apply to it a curse. Treat it as cursed. Do not have any benefit from it. The kulan mishalchem es an chutz la'ir. We have to send them out of the city. Even though it's not surrounded by a wall, like we learned with tzaraas of the clothing. When clothing is afflicted with tzaraas, the way you behave with it is you must send it outside the camp. When it comes to people, they have to go outside the camp only if the city is walled, not if it's not walled. But over here, homes and clothing have to be sent out of the city, no matter what city it is. Halacha beis, there is a difference, even though the homes that are both in quarantine and decidedly impure are considered to have a tumah. There's a difference between them. Bayis musgar, and this is where the opinion that I mentioned in the last halacha that understands that even a bayis musgar has tumah, basically supports themselves, because the Rambam himself makes a distinction between musgar and mukhlat, which implies that they both have a certain level of tumah. But anyway, be that as it may, you can look into the commentaries to see how they resolve this, but we're going to go with the simple understanding. Bayis musgar, a home that has been put into quarantine with a lesion of tzaraas, eine metame ella mitoichai. It only transmits impurity from the inside. There's a debate what this means. Either it means you have to go inside to become tameh, or it could even mean as long as you touch its inside, even if you're outside, but the tumah only comes from within its walls. Shenemar says in the verse, "V'haboel habayis kol yemei hisgiraisa yitma da'arev." If someone comes into the home during the days of its quarantine, they will be impure till the evening. You have to go in. But once a home has been declared decidedly impure, it transmits impurity both from the inside and from its outside. If you touch the outside of such a home, you are going to become impure. Because it says in the verse, same verse, Tzaraas mam eres. My Rambam skips the word he, but some Rambams might have the word he. Tzaraas mam eres he babayis tamehu. It is a accursed tzaraas in the home. It is impure, which means what? Torah is declaring that it's impure. I mean, even before it was decidedly impure, it's still impure. It's in quarantine. What was it pure? At this point, Torah is adding an additional layer of impurity. That it should be entirely impure, and even from the back. And as the commentaries explain, what this means is that once a home has been decidedly impure, it achieves a new status, qualitatively speaking, of the tumah. Until then, the tumah was just kind of ethereally inside the home. Inside the walls of the home carried a spirit of impurity. Once a home is mukhlat, the stones themselves, the material itself that makes up the structure of the home, gets the law of impurity. And therefore, no matter where it is, inside or outside, it becomes impure. Which, by the way, even in the house of the quarantine, the stones themselves that had the lesion had to be removed, and also themselves become essentially impure. And even if you touch the backside where the lesion is not, you become also impure. While there's a difference inside, outside, but definitely no matter if it's a quarantine home or a decidedly impure home, it makes you impure with entering. Entering would mean whether you came into the home or even if the home came into another home. Now, how does a home come into another home? The Rambam immediately explains. Ketzad, what does this mean? Let's say you have a structure like this, a home within a home. And the inner home was the one that was afflicted with tzaraas. And now you have a home that's creating a covering over a bayis menuga. That's the common understanding. Others interpret this as meaning not a full home surrounding the inner home, but just a part of a home, let's say a part of a neighboring home, has a ledge that's covering over part of a home afflicted with tzaraas. But this is a simple meaning. Simple meaning is one literally around the other. Bein mukhlat, bein musgar. No matter at what point this inner home is, whether it's been quarantined or decidedly impure, or for that matter, if there's a tree covering the home, just going under the tree, or going into the outer home, since it's covering the inner home, so to speak, entered it entered the domain of the larger home, it entered the domain of the tree, you become tameh. Because you and the impure home are under one covering. So too, even menugas. Let's say it's not a home, just one stone. A stone that has a lesion on it. It was brought into a tent, into a room, and it was placed there. This is a very exact, precise wording. It has to be placed down. If someone's just holding it, it's not considered placed. It has to be literally placed in the home. Now it's considered to be in the home. Nitma kol asher ba'oil. Whatever is under that covering, which the stone is under, becomes impure. Haisa munachas tachas ha'ilan v'hatoir over. Using the scenario of a tree, if the stone is sitting under the tree and somebody pure walks by, nitma, he becomes impure because he entered the domain where the stone of Tzaraas is resting. On the other hand, if it was a pure person standing under the tree, the avar adam be'evem menugas, and a person carrying a Tzaraas with lesions went by, he doesn't impurify the pure person under the tree because it never was placed. It never became the domain of the stone. But if he puts it down, then yeah, timahu, he makes him impure. Because the dwelling place, the place where something with lesions is placed, becomes like it. Bein adam, bein kelim, bein avanim, ve'etza, ve'afare, whether it's a person, as we had in the case of Tzaraas of the skin, whether it's utensils, whether it's stones, wood, dirt, doesn't make a difference. If something has Tzaraas, something is carrying Tzaraas, and it's somewhere, it's in a location, that entire location becomes subject to its Tumas. Halacha Daled, however, it's a little different than what we had by corpse impurity. Because by corpse impurity, we also had the concept of oyel, that if you and a corpse are in the same room, you become impure. Nevertheless, with oyel, there was an extra stringency, that if you become a covering over a corpse, or if a corpse becomes a covering over you, that's also tumas oyel. Not so by the mitzvah. Hama hil biyodei al even menugas. If somebody creates a covering with his hand over a stone with Tzaraas, or it became a covering over you, tahar, you are pure ad sheyiga, until you touch it, or until you enter the same covering. But the point is, you and it cannot become an oyel for each other. Halacha hey, tahar shenichnas lebayis menuga derech achayrov. Somebody is pure, and he is entering a home with Tzaraas, but he's entering it backwards, not in the normal way. Typically, you walk forwards into a home, he's walking in backwards. Then, afilu nichnas kuloi chutz mechatmai, even if the entirety of his body goes in, with the exception of the edge of his nose, tahar, he's pure. Because that's not called, what does it say in the pasuk? V'haba el habayis, right? You have to come into the home. Shenemar, it says, v'haba el habayis, one who comes into the home, derech biya tima Torah. Torah only communicates impurity if you go in the normal way. If you're going in backwards, so long as part of your body is outside, you don't become impure. Now, of course, if your entire body goes in, then we don't care which way you came in. Imagine someone was sitting in the house, just sitting there when the lesion appeared. Whether he went in or not, he becomes impure. So if this guy fully went inside, even if he went in backwards, he becomes impure. But while he's on the way in, we can't make him impure till he fully comes in. Halacha vav, tahir shehichnis reisha v'ruba lebayis tameh. When you go in normally, if a pure person puts in his head and most of his body into an impure home, nitma, he becomes impure. V'chein talis tahira, a kosher shawl, cloak, pure, a pure cloak or a pure shawl. Shehichnis mimena shalish al shalish, lebayis tameh, that you put in a size of at least 3 by 3 finger breadth, which is the significant size to be considered halachic cloth, and you put it into a home that has Tzaraas, nitmes, it becomes impure. V'chein kli cheres, shehichnis avida lebayis tameh, a pottery utensil which only contracts impurity from its airspace if you put its opening into the impure home, even if the rest of the utensils outside, nitma, it becomes impure. Aval shar kelim, but other utensils, not pottery, ad sheyachnis reiv hakli, it's only until you put in most of the majority of the utensil. Misheyachnis ruba nitma miyad, when you put in most of the utensil, it becomes impure right away. With one caveat. When do we say that other utensils become impure right away? Bekelim shenichnesu chalutzin. If these articles or clothing or whatever it is enters the home with Tzaraas on their own, unworn. Aval adam Yisrael. But let's say you have a Jew shenichnas lebayis menuga that enters a home with Tzaraas. V'hu lavush bivgadav, and he's wearing clothing. V'sandalav beraglav, he's wearing sandals on his feet. V'tab oisav biyadav, he's even wearing rings on his finger, on his hands. So these are not kelim chalutzin. These are not articles that are unworn. They're on the person. The person is wearing them. And we have a special rule that we learned from a pasuk, which we'll see in a second. And what is that rule? So indeed, the person himself, his body becomes impure right away. Ubgadav tehirim, but his clothes remain pure. Ad sheyishesham, until he waits there. The following amount of time, the following time frame, we know this as kedei achilas pras, time it takes to eat half a loaf of bread, kedei sheyasev adam, time it takes for a person to recline. The yoichal keshalish beitzim pas chitem, and he'll eat about 3 egg size of a wheat loaf of bread, beliftan, with condiments. That's called kedei achilas pras, and there's a varying opinions as to how much of a time frame this is, literally varying from 2 to 9 minutes. That's a very, very extreme difference. But that's called kedei achilas pras. And there's a special dispensation. While your body becomes impure right away, the clothing has a little bit of time. And let's say you would leave, your clothing are saved. at least they're saved from becoming more severely impure. Of course, because you're touching them, they become impure from you, but at the lower level of impurity, not directly from the home of Tzaraas. How do we know this? Shenemar, because it says in the pasuk, the hashoiche babayis yechabes es begadav. One who lies in the home with Tzaraas has to wash his clothes become impure. And then it says, v'ha'oichel babayis yechabes es begadav. One who eats in the home also has to wash his clothes. Now, what's the pasuk saying over here? In the case where a person enters to eat a meal in the home, you think he's only going to become impure once he eats? Well, he's already in there. Entering the home makes you tameh. So why is Torah saying if you eat in the home, you become impure? Torah is communicating to us the time frame. Torah is giving us the amount. When a person lies down in the home, simply enters the home, how long does he have before he has to wash his clothes? The time it takes to be considered eating. But really, it's doesn't matter if you're lying, if you're sitting, if you're standing. If you delayed the time it takes to eat that amount of eating, the 3 egg size of the wheat loaf, nitmu begada, then your clothing becomes impure. Halacha zayin, misha nichnas labayis menuga. Let's say somebody comes into a home with Tzaraas. The kelev al kseifav, with his clothing or some piece of clothing over his shoulders. The sandalav, the tabatay, the kapav, or his sandals and rings is in his palm, not being worn the usual way. Hu vehein tmein miyad. Then him and the utensils are both impure right away, like any utensils or articles of clothing that are unworn. The only thing which can be saved from becoming impure right away is clothing that you're actually wearing. So too, if it's an idol worshipping Gentile or an animal, that were wearing the clothing, and they came into a home with Tzaraas, they don't have the special dispensation. Notice that Rambam before, what did he say? Adam Yisrael, a Jewish person, not if it's a goy or an animal. Even if they're wearing the clothing's become impure right away. But the body of the Gentile and the body of the animal are both the same. They cannot contract impurity, as we've learned way in the beginning of this book, that the whole idea of Tumas is only applicable to Jewish bodies. And there's a mystical reason for that, because Tumah only looks where there's extra measures of holiness, and that's found in the Jewish godly soul, not so in regular animals and humans that were not blessed with the godly soul. Halacha ches. Misha haya aimed bebayis menuga. If somebody is standing in a home with Tzaraas, upashat yadei chutz labayis v'tabayis b'yadav, and he stretches his hand outwards, the hand has on it some rings. Im shaha kedei achilas hashir, if he waits in this home, the time it takes to eat, kedei achilas pras, which means that all his clothing will become tamei. It also includes the rings that are outside. Nitmu hatabois afal pisheim b'chutz. The rings become impure even though they're outside. V'chein, and so too. Ha'imid b'chutz upashat yadei lebayis menuga. If you're standing outside, you put your hands into the home with Tzaraas, so the same rules apply. Nitmu yada bilvad miyad. Your hands alone become impure right away. V'im nishtao sham kedei achilas hashir. And if you wait there, your hands in that position for the time it takes to eat an achilas pras, nitmu taboisav, the rings also become impure. V'im lav tohiris, and if not, then they remain pure. This tumah is obviously only rabbinic, because biblically you have to go after the person standing outside. There's no way to make his rings impure, but the rabbis imposed that the same rule should apply if you put your hand in as if you put your entire body in. Halacha tes, a very interesting rule. Kol hamatzil b'tzamid pasil b'oyel hames. Anything which would save entities inside it if it were sealed tightly in a room with a corpse, matzil mechuse bebayis menuga, simply needs to be covered, not tightly, if it is to save in a home with Tzaraas. In other words, in a certain way, even though there are small differences, the idea of a person or utensils becoming impure in a Tzaraas home is the same idea as becoming impure in a corpse home. We remember from the laws of corpse impurity that if you have certain utensils, pottery, stone utensils, if they're sealed tightly, then certain things inside them are saved. The corpse impurity, in this case the Tzaraas impurity, doesn't reach them. The Rambam is saying over here that for the Tzaraas impurity not to reach them, we go one level down. They don't have to be covered tightly, they could even just be covered. And similarly, anything which, were it to simply be covered, would save the tumah of the corpse from entering it. Even if it was open, uncovered in a Tzaraas home, it is pure. What's an example of that? A pit. A pit is considered to be some kind of a separate domain. So in a room with a corpse, it had to be covered, this pit, in order to save the tumah from entering it. But in a home with Tzaraas, simply it's sufficient that things should be in the pit to be considered in a separate domain, not in the Tzaraas home, as the Rambam immediately explains. Pottery utensils, stone utensils, earthen utensils that have not been fired in the kiln, they're not pottery yet. or anything like it. There was food or drink or utensils inside them. And they were covered, simply covered, not tightly, in a home with tzaraas. Even though they aren't surrounded with a tight covering, them and anything inside them are pure. Going the next level, haber v'hadus, or some have v'hachadus, a pit. That's a pit going underground. Chadus, we had this, is the pit above ground, so to speak. It's like a little structure that has an entrance. You kind of go inside, but the point is it splits off from the domain of the home. Even though they're uncovered, and any utensils or articles inside them are pure, because again they're separate from the home. And now halacha yud, the Rambam takes us to zoom out and reflect in general on tzaraas. As we're going to see, this halacha is going to be a lot about the power of our words. And the Rebbe once noted, mystically speaking, that it's very noteworthy that the Rambam puts this whole speech about words in the 10th halacha. According to Kabbalah, there are 10 sefirot, 10 godly attributes, the 10th one being malchus, kingship, which is called in the Zohar, peh, the mouth, the power of speech, is very much interlinked with the number 10. And so it's fascinating that in the 10th halacha, we get a whole thing about speech. And what is that? The Rambam begins with the following. He says, Tzaraas hu shem ha'amur b'shutfus. Now that we've learned all 16 laws, we can really appreciate this. The word tzaraas is a name that really covers multiple things. It's a name that we use in partnership. It includes under its umbrella many things that are not similar to one another. Because you look in the Torah, you see a white spot on a person's skin is called tzaraas. At the same time, a bald spot in the hair or the head or the beard is also called tzaraas. If clothing has a change in color, if a home has a change in color, it's also called tzaraas. So just understand that tzaraas is a general name. It's a name for these lesions that appear in any shape or form. And you should know, says the Rambam, this change of color that takes place and is spoken about in the Torah, that happens on clothing and on homes, which Torah calls tzaraas in the name of partnership, even though I guess the original name is the skin lesion, but Torah is also calling it lesions on clothing and homes, is not something natural. It's not the ways of the world. It was a sign and a wonder that existed only among Jews, simply to warn them against engaging in evil speech, and the Rambam will soon delineate this. Note, please, that the Rambam only said that tzaraas on clothes and on homes was miraculous, not min hagash. He doesn't mention people's tzaraas, skin tzaraas, which makes some commentaries note that the Rambam understands that skin tzaraas is actually a natural malady. However, in Chassidus we're taught, the Alter Rebbe famously writes in the Kotei Torah, that even the skin lesions are not natural. And the Rebbe says it makes sense. As we're about to see in a moment, the way tzaraas used to work was it would first develop on your homes, then it would develop on your clothes, then it would develop on you. So since the homes and clothes lesions are not natural, so it follows that when a skin lesion develops as tzaraas, it's a follow-up to miraculous things. So anyway, its cause is not natural, even if it itself is a skin malady that we can somewhat identify as today. They say leprosy and different things like that. But initially, in its core, these tzaraas lesions were not there as natural course of the world. They were simply there to warn Jews against engaging in lashon hara. And how did it go? When somebody would speak negative talk, the first thing Hashem would send lesions to the walls of his home. And as the Rebbe explains this, it's progressive. Initially, when a person speaks negatively, your speech is divorced from you. It doesn't become part of you. I'm just talking. People say, I'm just talking. It's not me. So Hashem says, okay, you think your speech is not you? I'm going to send lesions onto things that are not you, furthest from you, they're your home. Im chazar boy, if the person gets the message and says, you know what, actually speech is somewhat connected with me, I'm going to take care and do tshuva, yitar habayis, Hashem will make that the home will become pure. Im amad b'rishay achu habayis, but if he stays in his wickedness, 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and his home needs to be destroyed as the law dictates, then that means Hashem says, okay, you think your speech is not so much part of you, but the more you talk, the more you engage in evil speech, it actually does become part of you. It becomes part of your soul, it becomes part of the way you are, it becomes part of your psyche. And therefore we have to get the lesions closer and closer to you. So first, the leather articles that you use in your home to sit on and to lie on, get a lesion. Im chazar ba yitaru, if you do tshuva, they become pure. V'im amad berishay ad sheyisarfu, if you stayed wicked till they had to get burnt, then Hashem brings it even closer to home. Mishtanin habagadim sha'alav, the material, the clothing that are on you become changed. Im chazar ba yitaru, you do tshuva, they become pure. V'im amad berishay ad sheyisarfu, if you stayed in your wickedness till they also got burnt, then God says, I got to show you that when you speak evil, it becomes literally you. Mishtana oirei v'yitztara. His skin will become changed and he'll get tzaraas. Which forces the person to be separated and publicized in a way that he's ostracized alone. And that is the final way to make sure to make sure that he doesn't deal with the evil people's, the wicked people's talk, which is scoffing and the evil speech. The Rebbe notes, the Rambam says, it would seem that since the goal of the person getting tzaraas is to make sure that he is not in a group with wicked people, then if there were multiple mitzayras at once, each mitzayra had to be alone. Otherwise, if all they're doing is going out of the city and they're being together, then there's just the talk continues, the session continues. So every single mitzayra had to be on his own. And here, the Rambam gives us a parallel where we see a similar concept when it comes to Lashon Hara in the Torah. And with this parallel, the Rebbe understands that Rambam is coming to teach us that we're not talking about Lashon Hara here as it's damaging. We had a whole chapter in the Rambam's first book, in the ways to behave, the prohibition of speaking Lashon Hara. That is in the context of damaging a friend. Ben Adam lachaveirei. When you speak badly about somebody, you literally can cause them harm. And that, the sages have many things to say, which the Rambam recorded in the laws Hilchos Deis, way in the beginning, chapter 7. What we're talking about over here is speech as it affects the person himself. Even if it's not damaging to somebody else. But it's bad talk influences you. You think it's just outside of you, but it's not. When you talk things, you begin to believe them, they become part of who you are. And that's what the Rambam is about to show us, an example in the Torah. Val inyan zeh mazir b'Torah. It's exactly for this that Torah says, in Parshas Kiseitze, it says, Hishamer b'nega haTzaraas, guard yourself, be careful with the Tzaraas lesion. Zacher, in the very next verse, seems totally unrelated. Remember, Eis asher asa Hashem alekecha leMiriam baderech. Remember what God did to Miriam on the way, when she got Tzaraas also for speaking evil. What's Torah saying? Be careful with Tzaraas, remember what happened to Miriam. Well, what happened to Miriam? Harehu Omer, Torah is saying, Hisbainanu ma'era leMiriam hanaviyah. Contemplate what happened to Miriam. Let's take a look at the verses here. It says that Miriam spoke to Aaron, her brother, about Moshe, about his wife. He had separated from his wife. Moshe and his wife, after Moshe received the Torah, he never went back home to resume marital relations. And Miriam was kind of disparaging that. And she said, Vayomru, Harak ach b'Moshe diber Hashem. What, Hashem only spoke to Moshe? Halei gam banu diber. He also spoke to us. And we continue living married life. So Moshe, she equated Moshe to other prophets. She didn't realize he was a much greater prophet. And therefore he had higher standards of behavior. But that's what she said. That was her Lashon Hara. Okay? So think about this. What happened to Miriam the prophetess? Shadibra be'achia. She spoke about her brother. And which brother are we talking about? She's older than him, so he has to honor her. V'gidlatu al birkeha. She literally raised him on her knees. V'sikna ba'atzma lahatzile min hayam. And she endangered herself to save him from the sea. So clearly, she's not out to damage him. This is not the Lashon Hara that we're talking about in the beginning of the Rambam. Not damaging him, this is simply just talk. She's just talking about a person who she really cares about. She didn't even speak negatively. Even the content wasn't negative. She made a mistake. She compared him to other prophets. Additionally, Moshe didn't even care. Moshe wasn't particular about it. What does the very next verse say? Moshe was very humble. It didn't bother him. It didn't ruffle him. And nevertheless, just because the speech itself was negative in a certain way, it affected her, and she got tzaraas. How much more so? People that are wicked and foolish, that they speak great and wondrous negative things, with intent, with malicious intent, sometimes. Certainly they're going to get punished. That's what Torah is saying. If you check out Miriam, you'll realize how fast tzaraas will come. Therefore, if somebody wants to have his ways aligned, it's fitting to get away from sitting with them and speaking with them. So the person shouldn't get caught in the net of these wicked people and their foolishness. And the Rambam gives us the whole step-by-step. What happens when somebody speaks negatively, how it progressively becomes more and more part of them. Again, not in relationship to the person they're speaking about, in relationship to themselves, how they become less and less sensitive to spirituality. Here's how it goes. This is the way of those that are scoffers and wicked people. First, they simply speak words of nothingness, words of vanity. As it says in Koheles, the voice of a fool is recognizable when there's too much words. Too much talking, he's foolish. But then you speak too much worthlessness. They begin to speak a little less sensitively about righteous people. They talk derogatively about righteous people. As it says in Pasuk in Tehillim, David HaMelech prays, let the lips that speak falsehood become muted. The ones that speak negatively about a tzaddik. David is saying two things. Lips speak falsely, lips speak badly about tzaddikim, because one leads to another. When you simply start speaking worthless things, it will lead you to speaking negatively about tzaddikim. And then from that, they'll even rise a level. They'll get accustomed to speaking about prophets. And to put falsehood, attribute falsehood to their words. As it says in a further verse in Divrei Hayamim, they began to laugh at the messengers of God, and embarrassing his words, and making fun of the prophets. And then from that, they'll even come to speak about Hashem, and ultimately deny the fundamental principle of God's existence. Because one leads to the other. When you become desensitized to one thing, it leads you to become more desensitized to even further things and more holier things. As it says in Melachim, the Jews began to speak in secret, things that aren't true, al Hashem Elokeim, about Hashem their God. Another verse where this is seen by Hari Omer also says in Tilim, Shatu b'shamayim PM, they place their mouth on the heavens, u'l'shaynam tialach ba'aretz, and their tongue walks on the ground. One causes the other. Mi gadam lehem lashis b'shamayim PM, who caused them to have their mouth directed at God, at the heavens, l'shaynam shehilcha tchila ba'aretz, their tongue which first began to walk on the ground. Again, same thing, one leads to the other. And again, I'm emphasizing, we're not talking about lashon hara against the individual, or the harmful part of it. We're talking about the person himself. Speaking badly makes you a less spiritual, sensitive person. Zuhi sichas hareshayim. This is the talk that's done by wicked people. Shagayremes lahen, which by the way is caused to them by yeshivas kranais, sitting on the street corners, v'yeshivas knesiyah shlam me'aretz, or sitting in gatherings with people of the land, people that are ignoramuses, v'yeshivas batim mishtoyes imsheisei shecher, those that sit in the bars, those who drink beer. Avol sichas ksherei Yisrael, but the talk of kosher Jews. And the Rambam now shifts gears to positive talk, not just because he wants to finish off with a good thing, but because he wants to show you what Hashem is doing. Hashem wants to get the Mitzvah away from the negative talk, and he hopes, it's a very big kindness. He does ois v'pele, he makes miracles to inspire the Jew to come and start talking in a more kosher way. What's the kosher way for a Jew to talk? In the complete opposite way of Lashon Hara. Lashon Hara makes you successively, progressively less sensitive. Proper talk makes you progressively more sensitive. Watch this. First of all, they only speak about subjects of Torah and wisdom. Therefore, Hashem helps them, and he makes them meritorious through it. And the Rambam brings a verse, and he quotes the entire verse, because in every word here, it's hinted how kosher Jews talk. Shenemar, it says, and I'll give you two interpretations of the Rebbe. One interpretation is the levels to which they reach. Oz nidbiru yirei Hashem ishal re'ehu. Then, those who fear God speak one to another. Here we have Yirei Hashem mentioned alone. That's the level what we call in Kabbalah Yira Tata, lower level of fear. Vayakshev Hashem Vayishma. In response to that, Hashem hears and listens. Vayikasev Sefer Zikarin Lefanov, and he writes it down as a memorandum before him. LeYirei Hashem u'Lechosh Ve'Shmai. Now it calls them those who fear God and those who think about His name. Because once you go from Yira Tata, then you go to Yira Ilah, a higher level of fear, where it's about Hashem's name, not so much about the result that it's going to make for you. And then, also hinted in this verse is that Hashem gives you the gift, ahava, love to Hashem that comes milamayla. And also notice that Rebbe says how the verse describes it. Nidberu means they talk automatically. Kosher talk, wise, holy talk, doesn't need to wait for instructions. It happens on its own. And it's also done publicly. Ishal re'eyu, man to friend. They don't just talk in privately about the holy things. Even on the street, they speak proudly about the right things. And then that causes that Hashem responds in kind and gives you the gift of being even more elevated and more meritorious through it. Brich Rachamana Desayan, blessed is Hashem who grants us assistance. Mazel Tov for concluding the laws of the impurity imparted by Tzaraas.